Welcome back to another video on the channel. As always, we're just going to be doing some TA, just giving you my ideas for the week. My camera, unfortunately, is broken, so not able to record a proper intro. And it has been, I don't know why, just kind of like messes with my computer sometimes. So I just decided to not be using it. Nonetheless, as always, not financial advice, but we're always going to go through every single stock that we tend to look through technically every week because there's always money to be made on these very liquid names, right? Starting off, obviously, with one of the bigger chip names, we're looking at AMD. Now, AMD has been getting sold off since hitting its highs at around 230. And some news came out today about China starting to not use AMD and INTC chips in their computer systems, so which will inevitably end up hurting the stock, right? 22% of all of China's or 22% of all of AMD's revenue rather comes from China for them using their chips. And I believe it's 27% for INTC. So specifically with AMD, however, after touching its highs and reaching a very big, or having a very big retracement, rather, from this 230 level all the way down to this 175 area, right? If not there, 174. So around this specific area. Honestly, with that news, I would continue to see it selling off a little bit. I mean, chips have been pretty much outperforming the entire market, and AMD is obviously no stranger to that. However, as of recently, it's kind of just been dying, right? I mean, as you can see here, from that 230 to that 175 is a very big drop. So honestly, I would like to see a little bit lower on it as we continue to go on into the week, especially with this news. But the market is always really random when it comes to news, right? Sometimes the worst of news is always the most bullish of news, and the most bullish of news is always the worst of news. The market tends to react in very different ways depending on the situation, right? So, specifically looking at AMD, though, we do have somewhat of a descending wedge. I know that it's not drawn properly and it looks absolutely ridiculous, but this wick is also absolutely ridiculous with or without Heiken-Ashi candles. So, this is the best I could do for it. Nonetheless, we are technically in a descending wedge pattern. Usually, this is where I tell people to sell, their kids and their kidneys and their homes and go take out $10 million loans and, put everything in on a specific company or specific asset, as this pattern typically plays out extremely bullishly and we end up having a massive move to the upside. But given the bad news that came out today, I don't know if we end up getting that move. Nonetheless, if we do end up getting that move, I'd like to see a move over 180.55, a hold over that in order to push us back towards this 185. Now, this 185 has proven to be the more difficult level for us. You see, we rejected here and we rejected here, right? But once we ended up breaking above it, we ended up reaching, I believe this was all-time highs. Then when we ended up coming back beneath it, we ended up selling off very heavily, right? We got a about $12 retracement from there. So this 185 is really going to be one of the more pivotal points for me going into this week, and seeing if this ends up breaking and holding, then we can continue to push to the upside, right? If not, and we do end up getting a quote-unquote relief bounce here, then I would like to see this rejection here to lead us inevitably, going lower. I'd like to see a break of 170 leading into this 168 to this 165 area. That's realistically what I'd be looking for this week. It's a 15-point range, really. Honestly, if we do end up getting over this 185, I would like to see this 187.71. Or even actually this 188.10, right? Call it just 188. That's realistically what I'd like to see, is 188, 188 to potentially, let's see. I mean, this is also perfect. This 193 level, right? That's really what I'm looking for. I'm not really looking for anything too insane, but with this news, we can end up selling off, especially if the market does not want to cooperate, does not want to hold. and we end up seeing, some more profit taking like we have been seeing in recent times. So that's kind of really all that I'm looking for on AMD. A break of this 185 taking us up into this 188. This 188 potentially leading us up into this 193. If we do end up breaking that 193, I potentially see 195, 196 area. But if we end up not, then that's pretty much as high as I think we'll go. If we do end up coming up over, or I'm sorry, to this 185 and rejecting, however, I would like to see this potentially 165 area. If not there, then just 170. So that's really all that I'm looking for on AMD. To the upside and to the downside, about a 10 to 15 point move. Next, we're starting out with Microsoft. So last week, I had mentioned that I believed Microsoft was going to get pushed back into all-time highs, in which inevitably it did. We ended up holding these zones, right? This 397 area, and then we ended up getting over this 422.75 area, 422.30 area, which inevitably pushed us into all-time highs, and we ended up peaking at, our high was 431.52. So we ended up getting this all-time high move. So from here, where do we go? Well, whenever a stock tends to move into its all-time highs, we end up getting price discovery, right? In which there's support built, in which there's resistance built, and we end up seeing, because we're trading at levels that we have never seen before. Investors are buying at levels that they've never seen before. So from that, we end up seeing where there's more demand and where there's more supply, right? So here is where I'd realistically just want to see a hold number, right? 425 hold. If 425 doesn't hold and we end up retesting this 422.75, 422 or 423 area rather, then, there's a big potential chance that we end up continuing to go higher. We've obviously created a trend, higher lows, etc. So realistically, I mean, we just kind of have to find our footing up here. As you can see, we do have, a very good general area of where we do need to hold though, right? As you can see, we have this 423 area, 422.75. We had some rejections here, but over this, I mean, we ended up flying. We ended up moving, what is that? Almost 10 points, right? We ended up flying like 9 points and $9.50, something like that. So a move over this level is relatively important. Now, a move below this level is also going to be relatively important. If the market decides that, we don't want to continue to go up, investors, quote unquote, investors decide to start selling, then we're going to end up, if we do end up coming below this level, then we should see a really good sell-off, as this level has been the level of where we ended up rejecting when it was at one point, again, all-time highs. And then after that, once we broke back above it, we retested right here. We went back to all-time highs. And then once we fell through it, what ended up happening? We ended up seeing, again, as I mentioned last week, we ended up seeing a 10-point move to the downside, right? And with that being said, I mean, if we do end up holding it, then, and which would be like technically, I guess, a perfect trend retest, right? If we do end up holding it, then again, inevitably, we should see more upside. So that's kind of all that I'm really looking for on Microsoft. Nothing insane. Do I think that we can continue to break to all-time highs? Absolutely, especially if the market allows. Especially if, people aren't doing as much profit taking as they have been recently. That's kind of realistically what I'm expecting is more all-time highs. And if we don't get those all-time highs and we do end up selling through this one specific level, then I do think that we get a really good retracement to the downside. Now, what are my levels to the downside? If we end up selling through this, 422.75 level, then I would really like to see this 421.62 and then potentially this 419 level. This 419 level would definitely need to hold. As you could see, some rejections. When we broke above, we went crazy. Rejection. When we broke back above, we went crazy, right? So that's really what I'd like to see is this 419 hold. If it has to be retested, which would be completely fine with me as well. So below that, I would really like to see this 415 hold. Below that, then I definitely think we end up seeing, down here in the 412 area, 410 area. So that's really all that I'm looking for on Microsoft. Now we're back with NVIDIA. Obviously, as I said last week, there is a huge possibility that we end up moving 100 points, right, within a certain amount of days. And I mean, it did happen. Again, you can't count these things out. No matter how weak the market may look, chips and AI might have no fucking ceiling. We have no idea at this point. However, we ended up seeing this, relatively, I was looking for that 960 level. We ended up rejecting around, 950. We rejected, I think our high was, not even I think, our high was 947.78, right? So, I mean, from Tuesday from the 19th of March, we had 850, and then on the 25th, or I'm sorry, on the 22nd of March, we ended up having 948. So the fact that we can have these massive swings is absolutely incredible, and it should be an opportunity that everybody takes advantage of. You could swing for a week, 2 weeks out, as expensive as it is. Honestly, it's relatively safe. So with all of that being said, I ended up not even changing this at all. I just wanted to kind of show you where we ended up breaking and where we ended up bouncing and all of that. So we ended up seeing a massive break, right? We ended up seeing a huge break to the upside. Now, what was okay, yeah, so the 18th of March. Okay, yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense. That's so wild to see, actually. That is so wild to see. Now, what do I expect to see from here? Well, realistically, I'd like to see this 9. What level is this? This 935, 925 level. I end up wanting to see these hold. If we do end up wanting to push higher. Now, we had 917 hold on Friday, I believe. This 917 hold and retest ended up pushing us back over this level. This was our massive break for the day on Friday. Was this around this 925, 926 area? Once we ended up breaking this, we ended up seeing this 948 level. So with that big break having happened, this would be a level that I'm looking out for, and that would be considered relatively strong, right? Now, if we do end up breaking down, 920 I'd like to see hold, and 908 I'd really like to see hold. But again, it all just depends on the overall health of the market. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm really expecting for Nvidia is continuous upside. If the market allows, I'd like to see this 958 break. This 960 break, rather, would end up, again, inevitably taking us to all-time highs. I'd like to see 1,000. That's really what I'd like to see before I decide to enter any type of short on this name, right? It would be relatively important for us to reject 1,000, just kind of like SMCI did, right? We saw it break 1,100 and end up selling, or I'm sorry, we saw it break 1,000 and we ended up seeing it sell a couple $100 within a day. So seeing these massive moves, I definitely think that there is another opportunity for Nvidia on that specific day, right? Whenever we do end up hitting that 1,000, if we reject it a couple days later, maybe we're trading above it, we fall through, we can see potentially the same type of move as we saw in SMCI. So I'd really like to see a 960 break and take us to 1,000. Once we break this 975 level, and if we break this 975 level, then we're gonna end up going into price discovery mode. Just like I had mentioned with Microsoft, we're gonna have to find our footing in some way, and then after we find our footing, inevitably we should be able to tell where more people are wanting to buy and where more people are willing and wanting to sell. So that's really all that I'm looking for on Nvidia. Again, just continuous upside with it. If not, then I'd love to see a retest of this 900 level. This 900 level holds, then honestly consider me really long. It really wouldn't make sense to not be long. So that's really what I'm looking for on Nvidia. Now, moving on with some of our crypto names, or rather our biggest crypto name, we're looking at Coinbase, right? Coinbase ended up seeing some significant downside due to, Bitcoin's significant downside, right? Obviously, that's going to be the case. I mean, it makes the most sense. So on Monday, we ended up opening up around this 245 level. This 245 level ended up taking us down to this 215 level. Now, this 215 level did end up holding. And this 215 level ended up giving us a very, 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 very big bounce, right? So from this 215, we ended up seeing this 276 yet again. Now, this 276, having seen this 276 again, we ended up rejecting it, right? So this could be seen as a double top, especially if we decide to not hold around this 250 level. I think that we, again, see some more significant downside, just like we saw here when we broke down below 250, right? We ended up seeing some good downside. What was this? To 243 and to 242, right? Around these specific areas. If not there, then we end up, and we end up going lower inevitably. I mean, that makes the most sense. To me, my short trigger is going to be this 243 in order for us to see some significant downside, possibly down into this 234. And then I really, really, really would like to see around 230. That's kind of like where I'd like to see a good bounce. And it just depends on, obviously, the overall trend of the market, right? But it also depends on the overall trend of crypto in general, too. So there may be a time relatively soon when we do come down and revisit this 222, but this 243 level will inevitably be my my short trigger. Now, what would be my long trigger? My long trigger would be this 250 holding as it did, and a break of this downtrend. A break of this downtrend into this 260 would be relatively healthy for us. This 260 hold would then take us up into, honestly, I really would like to see 266 after that, 265, 266 area. Leading into that, I definitely think that we end up seeing this 270, 270 over this 276. Now, if this is not a double top, this takes us back to my first point. So if this is a double top, we should see significant downside, right? If this is not a double top and we end up breaking through this, again, like I mentioned last week, we should end up seeing that 300 level really, really, really fast. And it should be extremely aggressive considering the fact that we did end up rejecting twice at this specific level. So this 276 level ends up breaking. I mean, just go long. Like that's my personal opinion on what you should do is to just go long, because usually when we have massive breakouts like this, we saw it with Nvidia, we saw it with SMCI, we saw it with MSTR, we saw it with all kinds of different big names. When we end up seeing these pivotal areas in which there was big rejections end up getting broken, then we end up seeing significant upside, and we end up seeing that significant upside really, really quickly. So over this 276, I do see that 300, but that's just my opinion. Now, yeah, that's kind of all that I'm looking for on Coinbase. I mean, with crypto going crazy, with some weird DeFi tokens going absolutely nuts, we do see some relative strength within the crypto market, right? You see a lot of liquidity get poured back into it. So we'll just have to see what ends up happening if Bitcoin decides to take back all-time highs. We've been consolidating, around 60 to 70,000 in between that range. I know it's a $10,000 range, but for Bitcoin, that is absolutely massive for people to continuously be buying at near all-time highs. So we'll just have to see what ends up happening. Inevitably, I do think that we end up going back to the upside, but again, that's just my opinion. But that's kind of all that I'm seeing for Coinbase. So another specific name that we talked about last week was obviously IWM. I believe that I said I wanted to see a big retest of this 200 level, in which we did end up seeing a big retest of this 200 level and then a close back above. And FOMC was also on Wednesday, so I really wanted to take a longer dated contract. Only because I was expecting a lot of chop that day, and I did not want to get cut and beat up inside either 1 or 2 DTEs, depending on how IWM trades. I believe it was 2 DTE. So we ended up taking the 207 calls for April 1st. Now, I ended up selling at around 100%, but the contracts ended up going completely in the money. I mean, they absolutely fucking ripped and went so stupid. So we ended up taking them at $100 each, and they ended up going, I believe, like 300%, if not 300%, around 250%. And we snagged it right off of the lows. I really liked this setup here, as it was an inverse head and shoulders. You got the head here, and then one shoulder, two shoulder. I really just wanted to see a break to the upside, and I had mentioned this 204.03 level last week. We ended up smashing through this level, not even coming down to retest it, and we just retested 205.52 and then 206.38. And then we ended up testing this 208.25, which is really what I wanted to see. If we ended up getting a close above this, I believe I said we would make our way to this 210, 215. We ended up not getting that, and we ended up getting a rejection, and that rejection ended up taking us back down to this 205.52 level, a little bit lower, actually, around this 205 level. So if we end up holding this 204.03 again, then again, consider me long. I mean, IWM is probably one of the funner names to swing, as it tends to have relatively healthy moves over the course of a couple days, and it's relatively safe to hold over those couple days. So realistically, I mean, what I'd really like to see is, again, it's kind of the same plan as last week. If we end up retesting this 200 level, then so be it. I would love to go long back above that. If we end up not retesting that and we hold above this 204.03, then and we retest it, then I would love to go long there too, in order for us to have a higher and healthier move up, right? Now, if we go below this 204.03, this will be my trigger to the downside for this 200 level and this potential retest of it, at least. Honestly, yeah, that's kind of really all that I'm looking for on IWM. The game plan really hasn't changed. I mean, we're still in this considerably weird range, right? I mean, it's just we got this head and shoulders and we got this inverse head and shoulders. So we're kind of just seeing what's about to happen with IWM. Again, if you're gonna take the trade, I really recommend that you take some longer dated contracts and some swings on this name, as it just seems a tad bit more not only safe, but you also get more out of the move, as you have more time on your contracts. Therefore, if you're already up and you tend to scale out and you take a couple contracts at a time, then you can end up holding those risk free, no problem. And the moves with IWM typically aren't like QQQ, right? Where you will go from 435 to 439 within an hour, 2 hours. This will typically not happen with IWM, and you'll end up getting that slower move, which will end up protecting your capital too. So yeah, that's kind of all that I'm looking for on IWM. Same game plan as last week. Would love to see a break over 208.25 in order for us to see that 210, possibly move into that 215 level. A break under this 204.03. I'd like to see a retest of 200. Below 200, again, my favorite level of all time is that 197.12. That's really what I'd like to see. So that's kind of all that I see for IWM. So the next idea on our list is Meta. Now, Meta, again, as I mentioned either last week or in previous videos, we see highs get taken out, and then we see a big downtrend, and then we see a break of that downtrend. And inevitably, this has been a massive, massive thing for Meta specifically. I have no idea why. But as you can see, it's just been continuously happening. And we kind of are in the same situation that we were with Coinbase, right? We end up having some type of a W pattern, and then we come back, we have some highs, and then we have a downtrend. Now, the difference here is that we're actually holding above this 503.60 level. Now, this 503.60 level, as you could see, I'm sure previously I talked about this. This 503.60 level, these rejections ended up taking us down low, right? So we had rejections all up here, taking us back down low. Then we had a rejection here, ended up taking us down. But once we saw a break of it, we ended up seeing all-time highs. And then once we saw a breakdown of it, we ended up seeing some more lows. Rejections, lows, etc. Break above, we end up seeing some highs. Now we actually closed above. So considering the fact that we closed above and we're also in a downtrend, again, I'm going to continuously say this. If the market allows, then we should end up seeing a very, very heavy move with Meta. That heavy move should take us, honestly, over this okay, just call it 510 yet again. Just call it 510, 511.45. This will be my specific trigger, but call it over 510. If we end up closing an hourly candle above that, I do think that we end up pushing higher into possibly this 515 level, into this, 515.86, whatever level this was. What was the high of this candle? The high of this candle was 515.60. So over that, then I do think we see 517.80, call it 518. And then this 520 break will be massive for us. If we end up breaking this 520, then again, we should get pushed back into this 525 level. If we end up breaking this 525 level, then again, we go back into price discovery, just like I mentioned with Microsoft, right? So a close over this 503.60, I mean, there's a massive possibility that we end up seeing that 515 to 520 level. That's just my opinion, but I definitely think it's not too far fetched, considering the fact that, again, we closed above that 503.60, in which we've had a multitude of rejections and we've had a bunch of selling off within this specific area once we rejected it. So the fact that we closed above it is extremely bullish in my eyes. So that's kind of all that I'm seeing for Meta when it comes to the upside. Now for the downside, honestly, again, my trigger, as I've mentioned like 36 times just within this 2-minute little clip, is 503.60. If we end up closing beneath that 503.60, I will inevitably be short. And what would my targets be? My targets would be around this, around 500. That would be a big break for us, right? If we do end up breaking down and we do end up retesting 500, but we hold above, then consider me long yet again. I mean, there's no reason not to be long over a whole number, very high level, near all-time highs, with a specific company, and that specific company being Meta, right? So if we do end up seeing downside, however, through that 500, then I would love to see 495. 495 should take us down to this 492.42 level. Below that, I really would just like to see 490 to 488, then 486, and then 481. So again, a relatively massive range, but nonetheless something that is entirely possible, especially if we do end up seeing some really strong selling pressure through this 503.60 level, through that 500 level. If we do end up seeing, it hold up above 503.60, then we should hopefully and inevitably again see those all-time highs. So that's kind of all that I'm looking for on Meta.